Michael Naylor. He's the Managing Director and CEO of Eviemetals Group.
Thank everybody for joining this last session, sometimes called the graveyard session, but there's one good thing about it. We're sponsoring drinks. Okay. Thank you, Gareth. I didn't need to say any more. There it is, in a nutshell. But firstly, let me start. Eviemetals Group would like to thank and commend Bill Rapard and the Paydirt media team for their vision initiative in building this conference as a global platform promoting battery minerals for companies and projects in Australia. The 2022 Paydirt conference is very timely in view of recent and growing global awareness that electric vehicle manufacturers, battery cell manufacturers and chemical companies outside China have passed the tipping point where they can no longer assume availability and growth of supply chains for critical raw materials to support their global growth plans. As the Honourable Ministers Pitt and Johnson observed, this creates strategic opportunities and valuable opportunities for Australia. As all of us know only too well, availability of and access to capital are major barriers to entry to upstream, midstream and downstream battery materials business on a globally competitive scale. We applaud the recent financial initiatives of the Government of Australia and the Government of Western Australia for the development of battery or other critical minerals in Australia. This is the hard part for me, turning pages. I'd like to begin to introduce and provide some background on Eviemetals Group. Not many will know of us. We've been, if you like, flying under the radar since about 2014, but particularly in the last 3 years. Some have described us as a West Perth backyard startup, but I'll let you be the judge of that at the end of this presentation. Eviemetals is building a global battery chemicals and technology business. We are focused on delivering the world's first integrated battery chemicals complex at Yanbu Industrial City in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The battery chemicals complex will produce high-purity chemicals and cathode active materials containing lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese and other metals required for rechargeable batteries for electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. The battery chemicals complex comprises the staged development and expansions of a lithium chemicals plant, a nickel chemicals plant, a cathode active materials plant and an anode materials plant. That was the Ministry of Investment's idea, by the way. It wasn't quite in our model when we first started, but it works, and we'll explain why later. Our business model and strategy are based on the upstream integration of supply chains through joint ventures and offtake agreements to secure long-term, stable and transparent supplies of critical raw materials. For EVM, critical raw materials are mineral resources that contain the strategic metals required for decarbonisation for a clean energy future, namely lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese, vanadium, platinum group metals and rare earth elements. I think that covers not quite all the periodic table, but it gets there. Our strategic objective is to capture a growing market share of battery chemicals business as structural deficits in supply emerge in global markets over the remainder of this decade. To achieve this, we need to fast-track development for speed to market. The lithium chemicals plant has been designed to include 4 processing trains, each with a capacity to produce 25,000 tonnes per annum of lithium hydroxide monohydrate from processing 165,000 tonnes of spodumene concentrate containing 6% lithium oxide, which you'll all call SC6. Front-end engineering design, FEED, for the first 2 trains is scheduled for completion in Q4 2022. Construction is scheduled to commence at Yambu in Q1 2023 and followed by commissioning of the first train in the second half of 24. The second train follows the first train by a lag of 6 months. Our strategic engineering partner is Wood plc in Western Australia and in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The nickel chemicals plant is designed with 3 processing trains. The first will produce 150,000 tonnes of nickel sulphate hexahydrate, 12,000 tonnes of cobalt sulphate heptahydrate, and 13,000 tonnes per annum of manganese sulphate monohydrate from processing 170,000 tonnes of mixed hydroxide precipitate from an MHP plant based on our Rangewell nickel cobalt resources in the Midwest region of Western Australia. The cathode active materials plant will produce high energy density cathode active materials containing lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese. We refer to that as NCM, and lower energy density cathode active materials containing lithium, ferrous, phosphate, and other metals, and they are LFP and LFPM. See, I told you, Gareth, this would be hard for me. Many people ask us why the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and I'll do my best to answer that question by what I'm introducing here. So our journey to and in the Kingdom began in 2019. At that time, we were asked to consider building our nickel chemicals plant in the Kingdom, decoupling what would otherwise be at the back end of an MHP plant here in Western Australia. That led us to Vision 2030. As we understood it, in simple terms, Vision 2030 presented a national strategic plan to transform the economy of the Kingdom from being a global leader in energy based on fossil fuels to be a global leader in energy based on renewables. And with that, an incredible deployment of what we call petrocapital. And if you want to think about it this way, Saudi's been a global leader in energy based on fossil fuels. And when you're producing oil at, say, $5 a barrel, and you're selling it at $60 to $100 a barrel over 60 years, there's a fair build-up of capital. It's one of the few countries, in my view, that has the political commitment and the capital to make that transformation. The closer we looked into Vision 2030, the more we began to see strategic opportunities for EBM. The breakthrough for us was found in the aspirations of Vision 2030 to attract the development of midstream and downstream processing facilities for production of cathode active materials for the manufacture of rechargeable batteries for electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. Cathode active materials require high purity chemicals in the form of lithium hydroxide monohydrate, nickel, cobalt, and manganese sulphate for high energy density batteries, and lithium, ferrous, and phosphate for lower energy density. The production of cathode active materials is the strategic focus and core business of EVM. During the last 2 years, we have commissioned market studies and analysis of each stage in the supply chains for lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and other metals required for rechargeable batteries for electric vehicles and renewable energy storage. And that is from in situ resources right through to the delivery of cathode active materials to electric vehicle manufacturers and battery cell manufacturers. Cathode active materials generate the highest margins and returns in the supply chain, followed by lithium hydroxide monohydrate and then nickel, cobalt and manganese sulfate from intermediate products. There is no standard formulation or recipe for cathode active materials, and frankly speaking, this surprised us. Just about every battery cell manufacturer has a unique recipe and a unique prescription for how the cathode active materials are delivered for cathode and battery cell manufacture. I was asked, have you got an offtake agreement for your cathode active materials? The short answer is no. And in this market, people should understand that. Take lithium hydroxide monohydrate, for example. I was asked, do you have an offtake agreement for that? Well, you only get an offtake agreement, a long-term offtake agreement, after you've built a commercial plant. In this case, these first 2 trains cost $800 million. They have respectively 25,000 tonnes of capacity, it's LHM capacity per annum. But it takes you 6 to 9 months, and if you're lucky, 12 months to take production from that commercial plant through the requirements of cathode active material, through cathode active materials, that is, cathode active materials producers and battery cell manufacturers. I'm intimidated because sitting in this auditorium is Phil Dundas. He's our head chemist in this space. So Phil, correct me when I go wrong, hey? So cathode chemistries will differentiate by energy density required for specific applications, that is NCM and LFP. The screen you see in front of you will show the present position, but as markets develop, as electric vehicles develop, you'll see differentiation of cathode active materials primarily around energy density for certainly electric vehicles and the like. China dominates global processing capacity and production of cathode active materials, especially LFP. To be clear, market studies show us that China actually dominates 80% of global processing and production capacity for lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and cathode active materials, although their market is primarily LFP at this point in time. And with that, a lot happens in a year in this business. And what is really important about working with strategy is to understand when you see things changing, change. For example, when I start to talk about supply chains later, there are some global battery chemical companies, big companies like BASF and Umicore, who, unable to look at upstream integration of supply chains, it's just not been their business model for their history. But unless you have secure upstream supply chains, your business model's fatally flawed. In 2025, you won't be able to buy it on market. If your model is based on buying intermediate product, you're not going to be able to buy it. That's what our market studies are telling us. And hence, the only way to ensure that you have the supply chain is go upstream. And we'll just look at where the investment is going with that. NCM will lead cathode chemistry, but lithium iron phosphate will capture an increasing market share, and we're seeing that now, partly in response to the uncertainty about whether the supply chains can deliver sufficient nickel to actually supply the growth plans of electric vehicle manufacturers who have built their electric vehicles based on high performance vehicles that require high energy density batteries. And you'll see that predominantly in Europe. We have augmented our business strategy and model to bring lithium iron phosphate cathode production forward, and we'll go through what that looks like momentarily. There's a slide I think is now being shown. There's approximately 1.8 million tonnes, if I can read this correctly, of nickel required by 2040 that's not there today. From memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, If we look at 40,000 tonnes a year, which is Murrin's capacity, I think you're looking at, 200 Murrin plants, something of that order. The point is this, that there are no sulphide deposits that can supply that additional growth. Secondly, the only place that nickel is going to come from is from nickel laterite projects. So, Adrian Griffin, I think you're in this audience or this auditorium. It takes us back 20 years, and the naysayers are still around. Look at current developments. The Chinese are into Indonesia producing nickel sulfate from nickel laterites with the ear spin back. Huge growth is planned out of Indonesia using that technology. We think we have the best nickel team in the country. They will come to us from many years of experience. I think a number of us worked for Andrew Forrest at Anaconda back in the day, and we have recruited people that worked on nickel laterite projects, including Murrin for that reason. With them comes an extraordinary set of volumes of lessons learned, and that's what this is all about for us, risk mitigation. So EVM will produce high energy density and lower energy density cathode active materials. We will supply domestic demand from the battery cell manufacturing plant to be built in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They've invested $3 billion in a company called Lucid. Lucid is a new electric vehicle company formed by a guy called Peter Rawlins, who was the engineer that worked on Tesla for Elon Musk back in the early 2000s. He thinks he's built a better electric vehicle. I think he has. It's got a very unique powertrain, but going with that, of course, the PIF is the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia. So you can see where he's going to build his electric vehicle manufacturing plant. It's at King Abdullah Economic City. It's about 200 kilometres south of where we're building our battery chemicals complex at Yanbu. And with that, of course, they have to build a battery cell manufacturing plant. And for those of you that think that Australia can build a battery cell manufacturing plant without an electric vehicle manufacturing plant very close, it ain't going to work. It's just too expensive to transport battery packs around the world. Hence, what we're seeing in our studies is that you have to build your cathode active materials plant right next door to or very close to the battery cell manufacturing plant for a number of reasons, but that battery cell manufacturing plant must be close to the electric vehicle manufacturing plant. So until we develop an electric vehicle manufacturing industry in Australia, I can't see us building a battery cell manufacturing plant here. Then that raises questions about cathode active materials. They don't transport well. They've got to be close to market. PCAM can, but we'll go through that business model shortly. In the time that is available, I can comment briefly on two strategic issues: diversification of supply chains and supply chain risks. The battery chemicals complex is being developed as a midstream and downstream hub for diversification of global supply chains. For EVM, this means geopolitical alignment of supply chains between Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States, Japan, and India, with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a strategic partner and pivot. Original equipment manufacturers in growth markets in Europe and North America are seeking secure, transparent, and stable long-term supply of critical raw materials, high-purity chemicals, and cathode active materials. Global issues emerge from our market analysis and studies. First, there is massive investment at OEM level. Something like $1 trillion is committed today to new electric vehicle manufacturing plants and battery cell manufacturing plants. The key is this: the level of investment in the upstream supply chain for critical raw materials is not sufficient to supply the demand growth by OEMs who appear oblivious to the threats of disruptions to the global growth plans. The development plans of new electric vehicle manufacturing companies and new battery cell manufacturers who have not secured long-term offtake agreements to support development and growth are fatally flawed. In other words, Build a battery cell manufacturing plant and you don't have a supply, you're not in business. And that's what's happening. I don't know if you've read the analysis, but it's extraordinary. I find that people can invest $3 billion in a battery manufacturing plant or an electric vehicle manufacturing business and not have someone audit their supply. The opportunities for Western Australia. From all that has been presented so far, you may ask, what's in it for Australia? The agreement between National Industrial Development Centre of Saudi Arabia, NIDC, and EVM for the development of the battery chemicals complex also includes undertakings by EVM to develop the Saudi supply chain for critical raw materials. This is being undertaken through our subsidiary Riwak Al Muwarid for mining by applications for exploration licences over areas prospective for critical raw materials in the Arabian Shield. But as all of you here will know, it takes 5 to 10 years for discovery, development and production of minerals if you have an ounce of luck. In the meantime, EVM will implement the upstream integration and development of supply chains for critical raw materials through joint ventures and offtake agreements with Australian companies focused on Western Australia. Western Australia is a politically stable jurisdiction with low sovereign risk and transparent supply chains. Frankly speaking, it's an easy sell, especially in countries like the Kingdom. In January this year, EVM launched Australian Lithium Alliance as a strategic initiative to partner with Australian companies to fund and accelerate exploration, development, mining, production of lithium through joint ventures and offtake agreements as an alternative to Chinese companies that currently dominate the purchase of spodumene concentrate from Australia to supply chemical processing companies in China. Our first agreement was signed with Zenith Minerals in January. Zenith is an outstanding strategic fit as a first mover for the Australian Lithium Alliance. ZNC is led by Director Stan MacDonald and CEO Mick Clifford, who have a strong track record of success in project generation, acquisition and exploration for minerals in Australia. It's been listed on the ASX for about 15 years. Mick is presenting later in this session, so I'm not going to steal the spotlight, so to speak. He can speak to the work he's done, the results he's achieved, which I think are outstanding in the time we've been working together. What does this mean? EVM has agreed to fund all expenditure on the lithium projects of ZNC to completion of feasibility studies for a final investment decision and all capital expenditure until the commencement of commercial production, at which time Zenith will start to repay its share of capital that we funded for the plant. I'd briefly add that we have other transactions in the we estimate that $30 million in expenditure to final investment decision and a further $332 million in capital expenditure for an SC6 plant processing 2.4 million tonnes of ore to produce 330,000 tonnes per annum of SC6. This is foreign direct investment in Western Australia, one of the objectives outlined by the Honourable Minister for Mines and Petroleum, Bill Johnston, in the opening address this morning. I'll briefly add that we have other transactions in the pipeline. We plan to work with Mick and his team to develop ZNC, Zenith, as a pure lithium company, and the Zenith Lithium joint venture is a leading producer of SC6 in Australia. EVM has advanced feasibility studies for an MHP plant to produce 170,000 tonnes of MHP for the nickel chemicals plant in the Kingdom based on our Range Well resources, nickel cobalt resources in the northwest or in the Midwest region of Western Australia. The estimated expenditure for the development of the MHP plant is $3 billion US. Now let's be clear about a couple of things. Having worked with Andrew and watched Murrin be built and be further built, the plant is going to cost what it costs. And there's no way you can shortcut by reducing the capex. If people talk about building a mixed hydroxide precipitate plant for anything less than $3 billion, they're kidding themselves. Seriously. And people drive and drive to get, oh, the CapEx is going to be $1 billion, the CapEx. It's not going to be. And when you put that number up, people that actually understand the industry are going to say, no, mate, you're not going to get there with that. And this is what's important. So where does $3 billion come from? Let's walk down the terrace and ask your top stockbroker if you can raise $3 million for a nickel laterite project. Yeah? They'll think you're crazy. So the key part of our strategy here is this, that the battery chemicals complex provides a platform and a conduit to bring foreign direct investment to Australia to build that plant. And that's how it works. And that's what we'll do. For what it's worth, the first stages of the battery chemicals complex in the kingdom involve 3 chemical plants over the next 8 years to 2030 with a capex of $3 billion. Where's the money coming from? Where the plants are being built. Are you with me? I'd like to add that EVM is building a nickel inventory in Western Australia. We're also planning to partner with Australian companies to fund and fast-track exploration, development, mining and processing for the production of nickel in Australia through joint ventures and offtake agreements as an alternative to Chinese companies. EVM is referred to as an Australian company in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Interestingly, we are referred to as a Saudi company in Australia. EVM is actually the first Saudi company to invest substantially in our state. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce EVM. I've got to leave this presentation, so our Chief Counsel will take questions at the end of the session. Thanks very much.